Around the world, this is New Day. It is Friday, July 6th, 6 o'clock here in New York, and we do begin with breaking news because overnight, President Trump launched a trade war with China, imposing tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods. China hitting back with retaliatory tariffs and accusing the U.S. of starting the biggest trade war in history. So what are the consequences of this? We will explore that. Meanwhile, the president's scandal-plagued EPA chief, Scott Pruitt, is out of a job. President Trump insists that Pruitt made the decision to leave, but there are reports that the president pushed him out by forcing him to resign. Now a former coal lobbyist takes over.
A stunning admission from the U.S. government. The Secretary of Health and Human Services announced the government has reunited 0 families in the last week. We're talking about the children separated from their parents at the border and held in custody around the country. And that might not even be the most glaring admission here. Secretary Azar estimates that the number of kids in custody today, now again separated by the U.S. government, is fewer than 3,000. He estimates. Not only is that figure higher than we were originally told, but he estimates this is not a rounding error. These are children separated by the U.S. government. And it seems that this government did not even have the competence or decency to count them. Breaking overnight, a tragic setback in efforts to rescue the 12 boys and their coach trapped in a cave in Thailand. A former Navy SEAL is dead after running out of oxygen while trying to exit the flooded cave. So now rescuers say they have a, quote, limited amount of time to try to get the boys out alive. Let's begin our coverage with CNN's chief business correspondent, Christine Romans, on this trade war, which Romans is on.
It's on. It's a trade war between the U.S. and China. It's on, and it is real. At midnight, the stroke of midnight, the U.S. hit China with tariffs on $34 billion of goods. China immediately had revenge tariffs of equal value and accused the U.S. of launching the largest trade war in economic history. Now, China strategically threatening some high-value U.S. exports, cars, crude oil, and cash crops like soybeans. Those farm goods are strategic. They hit states and counties that voted for President Trump, while the U.S. is targeting high-tech industries that China has vowed to dominate: aerospace, robotics, manufacturing, and autos. Now, American companies importing those goods will pay those tariffs when they import them. They can either absorb the cost or pass it along to consumers. And so far, you guys, the U.S. has avoided slapping tariffs on things that consumers buy directly, like shoes and cell phones. They're trying to minimize that politically, no question. But the U.S. won't be able to avoid putting tariffs on those goods if the president follows through on his threat to hit $500 billion in Chinese goods. That's what he's told reporters yesterday. That's roughly the amount the U.S. imported from China last year, $500 billion. Now, consumers would be another loser of Trump's trade policy if this were to get into a big conflagration, right? If it's limited to $34 billion, it could probably be absorbed. If it gets bigger, $500 billion, that would be a problem for consumers. Also, losers here, domestic manufacturers. They have to pay to import foreign metals and foreign goods. Pork producers, soybean producers and farmers, all those would be affected by retaliatory tariffs. In fact, you guys, 100 soybean growers head to Washington next week to explain how these trade actions are going to hurt them. So there will be an optic next week of farmers hurt by the president's trade policies.
So I'm interested in the unintended consequences of this because, Rana, as you know, the president has always said the U.S. is being screwed over.
Yeah.
And under my watch, they're not going to be screwed over anymore.
Right.
And so is this good for the economy or bad for the economy?
Well, at this point, it's probably a net neutral. I mean, you know, one of the things Donald Trump did a few months ago was put in a big fiscal stimulus in the form of a tax break, right? So if you didn't have that happening right now, this would be a bigger deal. Right now, because you still have this strong growth happening already in the U.S., we can probably absorb the short-term impact. But as Christine was saying, depends on if you're talking about $34 billion or if you're talking about $500 billion. 34, I'm not worried about. 500 billion, definitely worried about.
And China has already retaliated. The president says there's more on the way. China says there's more on the way after that. When you talk about who's hurt, look, steel manufacturers, steel plants, they will be helped. However, the much bigger industries are further along down the supply chain. It's the manufacturers who will be paying, who are already paying a higher price for their input costs.
And those are duties that are being collected right now. You know, this is happening right now. And somebody importing stuff to make stuff in this country or to sell in this country is paying a little bit more. You know, the president wants to help domestic manufacturers and domestic producers. That is his goal here. But he could be hurting farmers. You know, the farm economy has not been that great over the past few years. So while the rationale of the administration is the economy is so great, we can fix trade. We can be the strong people to fix trade because the U.S. economy is so great. That same thing doesn't pertain to the ag economy right now. It isn't so great right now. And I think that that's something. There are soybean growers who feel as though the president is sacrificing soybean farmers for steelworkers.
Yeah. There's a fascinating quote, actually, today from a soybean farmer in South Dakota who says, I'd like to tell the president, man, you're messing up our market. And the question is whether he hears that or whether they've baked this in the cake. What I'm fascinated by is how come markets don't seem to be having a negative reaction to this?
Well, Asian markets are down a little bit. I mean, China is going to be hit, I think, immediately by this. They're a big export economy. The U.S. still has very strong growth. I mean, look, it has to be said. There's never a great time for a trade war, but this is about as good a time as any.
I would say this has been telegraphed since March, right? There's been a lot of time here for people to understand what's happening. If it stays at $34 billion plus $16 billion in tariffs later this summer, I think that's manageable for how strong the economy is. Here's what happens. If you don't get progress on an auto fight that the U.S. is trying to have with the Europeans, that could be a problem. If there are escalation and retaliation gets out of control around the world, that could be a problem. Trade wars and tariffs are so dangerous because you never know how they're going to spin out of control.
We've seen a little bit of progress with the Europeans recently. That's part of this issue, too. You can't fight everybody at once. We have actually legitimate beefs with China. I mean, the Obama administration would have said the same thing. But with the Trump administration going in fighting not just China, but fighting our allies transatlantically, our NAFTA allies, you can't do all that at the same time.
Well, I think that's one of the important points here is that some great resources, if you wanted to fight a trade war with China,
there you go,
would be Europe.
Great resources
would be all the members of TPP who we ran away from before. That's who you want on your side if you're fighting a trade war, and this administration has abandoned.
One of the big ironies of the Harley-Davidson fight that the president has picked is that Harley-Davidson originally was looking at moving to Thailand because the U.S. pulled out of TPP, and American-made bikes were going to be taxed so badly in Europe. So the president's trade policy there hurt this domestic manufacturer, and then the steel and aluminum tariffs hurt this domestic manufacturer, and then the retaliatory tariffs from the EU hurt this manufacturer again. So 3 ways Harley-Davidson got screwed by the president's trade policies. And then he flipped it on them as being somehow unpatriotic and waving a white flag.
That's an economic term, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So, John, explain the political calculus here. That the president and his advisors have decided that farmers who will be hurt don't count as much at the polls as whoever will be helped by this?
I don't think you should strain too hard looking for political strategy behind this. This is on the president's long-term to-do list. When he's campaigning, he's demonizing China. He's had this long-standing belief that trade imbalances are really simple, that's how you judge the ledger of
But everything there's a political calculus.
But of course there is. And to your point, if you look at the countries who are, the states who are most likely to be hurt by these initial tariffs, particularly China's retaliatory, Iowa, you get soybean, pork, you get Nebraska, Illinois. Iowa and Nebraska are states that Trump won handily. Really, Harley-Davidson, Wisconsin. These are states that really Trump depended on to pull him over the Electoral College.
So then how does this work?
Because I don't think they're playing chess in terms of thinking several moves out. If the pain is really hurt, remember, we got a midterm coming up, folks. So this is high stakes, whether or not they believe that the larger macro environment is good for a trade war.
There's huge divergence within the administration, too. I mean, you've got the Hawks, Peter Navarro, you've got Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, pulling in a different direction. I talk to people in Washington, literally, they don't know what's going to happen each time they walk into the Oval Office and come out within the administration.
Because this isn't a team of rivals here, where they reach a consensus, right? It's people with two diametrically opposed views, and no one knows where the president will end up at any given time.
The president is pulling the trigger on this. He wants to do this. He wants to get tough on China. And I'll say, Mexico this week, this isn't just, this is why you have global trade wars. Mexico doubled its tariff on U.S. pork to 20%. That's a big deal. This is they're fighting a war on so many fronts here. That's what makes it so dangerous.
Let me just quickly ask, because we're going to see jobs numbers come out today. And the Fed says there really isn't much they can do when it comes to a trade war. They basically say this is on you from a policy standpoint. But can a trade war, if it gets bigger and if it goes on, can it be recessionary? Is it the type of thing that can take a bite out of an economy now?
Absolutely. And if you look at the bond market right now, you see long-term interest rates are trending downward. That means that the markets actually think we could be going into a recession at some point if this continues for a few years.
The White House is really confident, though, and the people advising the president, that the U.S. economy is so strong. I mean, it almost red hot, the American economy right now, that they're not worried about a trade war triggering a recession. They're more worried about making sure the president looks like he is following through on his threats and promises to be super tough on China.
Christine Romas, Rana Foroohar, thank you very much. We'll be watching these throughout the morning. The domestic markets did turn red, are down now a little bit, not down a lot, but we'll be watching them all morning long. Meanwhile, Scott Pruitt is out at the EPA. The former administrator claims he resigned because of, quote, unrelenting attacks against him. He didn't mention the 14 federal investigations he's now facing, none of which, by the way, include the lotion. That's separate and on top of that.
Right? That's a whole separate
Lotion is not being investigated. Lotiongate isn't even one of the top 14 things.
I'm stunned.
They're against him. Nor was Mattress Gate, nor was I think Phone Booth Gate actually was.
Oh, that was. And in fact, he was guilty.
Well, they're investigating. Yes, I guess you're right. He did pay for the phone booth.
Yeah.
Keep the lotion out of the phone booth.
CNN's Abby Phillip waiting patiently in New Jersey near the president's golf club with the latest on this. Abby.
Well, good morning, John. Scott Pruitt has been battling all of these scandals, as you just mentioned, and his resignation has been met with a lot of relief from a lot of Republicans, both inside this White House and outside of this White House. Sources say that White House officials were cheering when he resigned yesterday. But yesterday on Air Force One, the president spoke to reporters about Pruitt's resignation. I was there with him. He didn't mention the scandals and said he wasn't really bothered by them.
President Trump defending embattled former EPA chief Scott Pruitt after announcing his resignation, telling reporters there was no final straw. He felt that he did not want to be a distraction for an administration that he had a lot of faith in. The president claiming Pruitt wasn't fired and insisting that there was nothing about the mountain of controversies surrounding Pruitt that concerned him. But that view wasn't shared among many in Washington, including a number of congressional Republicans.
We've seen scandal after scandal. You know what? As an Iowan, I don't appreciate it.
Pruitt is facing at least 14 federal probes for his alleged misconduct while in office. Controversies including allegations he rented a D.C. condo from an energy lobbyist for below market value, directed his staff to find a lucrative job for his wife, doctored records to hide evidence. President Trump defending embattled former EPA chief Scott Pruitt after announcing his resignation, telling reporters there was no final straw. He felt that he did not want to be a distraction for an administration that he had a lot of faith in. The president claiming Pruitt wasn't fired and insisting that there was nothing about the mountain of controversies surrounding Pruitt that concerned him. But that view wasn't shared among many in Washington, including a number of congressional Republicans.
We've seen scandal after scandal. You know what? As an Iowan, I don't appreciate it.
Pruitt is facing at least 14 federal probes for his alleged misconduct while in office. Controversies including allegations he rented a D.C. condo from an energy lobbyist for below market value, directed his staff to find a lucrative job for his wife, doctored records to hide evidence of calls and meetings with industry executives, which could be a federal crime, and spent lavishly on travel on the taxpayer's dime. But he made no mention of any scandals in his resignation letter, instead saying that the, quote, unrelenting scandals on me personally, my family, are unprecedented and have taken a sizable toll on all of us.
It's just unbelievable. In any other administration, Democrat or Republican, he'd have been gone months and months ago.
The Trump administration also facing criticism on a different front, still refusing to say exactly how many children separated from their parents are still in the government's custody. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar telling reporters that the total number is under 3,000, a figure far higher than the 2,047 total he gave just 9 days ago. Still, Azar insisting that HHS will comply with the court-ordered deadline to reunite all families by July 26th.
There's absolutely no confusion on our part. We have the kids, and we are working to comply with the court's order. Every child is accounted for. We know every child, where they are.
The administration confirming that they are using DNA tests to speed up the process.
This is outrageous. This is not what America should be standing for.
Still, President Trump remaining defiant, doubling down on his call for deporting undocumented immigrants without due process, tweeting, "Tell the people out and they must leave." In the meantime, thousands of parents awaiting moments like this Guatemalan mother's tearful reunion with her 8-year-old daughter.
And President Trump is here in New Jersey, not too far from here at his golf club. He's going to be meeting with Vice President Mike Pence tonight, and over the weekend, deliberating about his Supreme Court pick. He told reporters yesterday that he was down to about 3 or 4 candidates. Now, meanwhile, he has announced that an acting EPA administrator, Andrew Wheeler, would be taking over starting on Monday. Now, Wheeler is a former coal industry executive. He's worked for the Environmental and Public Works Committee. He also was a former top aide to Jim Inhofe, a well-known climate skeptic. So a lot of folks on the left here really concerned about this pick, but the president told us on Air Force One yesterday he likes Wheeler. He thinks he's going to do a great job, and he believes that Wheeler might actually be in this post for quite some time. Allison.
Okay, Abby, we will be talking more about Andrew Wheeler, what we know about him, as well as what happens with Scott Pruitt and all of these investigations that he's facing. So all of that when New Day continues.
From the very beginning.
So the Scott Pruitt era is over. The embattled EPA chief resigned over what seemed like an endless list of ethical and legal scandals. Question this morning, honestly, what took so long? Joining me now, CNN political analyst Brian Karem and CNN contributor, former director of the Office of Government Ethics, Walter Shaw. You know, Walter, I guess we now know the question, how many scandals and investigations does it take to oust a cabinet-level official? I guess it's 14. I guess 14 is the number, or the 15th, Walter, is one too many.
Yeah, that's the number of investigations. You know, I had an intern law student put together a list of all of his alleged violations, and it was 13 pages long.
Oh, we have a scroll that we can put up right now, and we're not looping this. I mean, these are just the investigations, but our scroll lasts many minutes long. I mean, to your point, Walter, here we go.
Oh.
It's stunning. It's stunning what this guy did, Walter. I mean, words fail. Are these investigations, the 14 ongoing ones, still going to proceed?
Yeah, they're going to continue. And, you know, there's at least some remote possibility he could still face some consequences. I think the bigger issue for all of us, though, is that because he got away with this so long, the new line is Scott Pruitt. And if you're a government official, a Trump appointee, or perhaps in future administrations, you know that if the Congress or the White House or anybody else criticizes you, you can point to this ridiculous list of Scott Pruitt allegations and say, well, you know, I still got 12 pages of violations to go, so I'm good.
and again, the president, and John, the president had a chance to draw a line here, had a chance to say, you know, I did this because Scott Pruitt crossed the line here. And the president chose to say, nah, you know, there was no final straw here, even though the reporting from Maggie Haberman of the Times, Josh Dawsey of the Washington Post is they pushed him out. The president had his chief of staff whack him.
Yeah, you know, Kelly did what Kelly does, which is he delivers the final bullet. But, you know, this really does say that if you long and keep it to 12 ethics investigations and you're doing the industry's bidding, you know, if the special interests on the right are thrilled with your performance, you can rack up all sorts of embarrassing allegations and investigations and you'll be fine. Ultimately, I think, you know, what is often the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of the president is just a distraction, just too many bad headlines. This was a sheer tonnage of it, but the industry was happy. Trump put up with a lot.
I will say the camel is totally obscured by the straws here. The camel is buried in straws.
There's a camel in there somewhere.
Yeah. The point you guys have to realize is that it doesn't matter about special interests. The reason why he lasted as long as he did is because he was Donnie's boy. And that's the tail of the tape. Other people are not going to get that many investigations. It's that he was there doing what Trump wanted. He was destroying the EPA. And the guy coming in is maybe even worse, but he was doing the president's bidding. And what I heard yesterday, which was interesting, is that back in June he was going to leave, but he actually wanted to stick around for the 4th of July picnic and the fireworks display, and
priorities, people,
and then left the day after.
Okay,
so that's telling in and of itself.
It's a good fireworks display.
Well,
yeah.
To be fair,
I mean,
the fireworks
are you talking about the fireworks display or his fireworks display?
Right.
Because that's been interesting too.
We have Exhibit A of the letter.
The mattress?
No,
Oh.
the letter that he wrote, his resignation letter that he wrote to the president, and we just need to read a portion of it because it is so stunning. My desire in service to you has always been to bless you as you make important decisions for the American people. I believe you are serving as president today because of God's providence. I believe that same providence brought me into your service. How moist is that?
That's moist.
That's moist.
In all seriousness, one of the things here that I want to point out is that he talks about his service to Donald Trump, not his service to the United States.
There you go. And John, that's the point. That's the greatest point you can make, is that he believes it's the fealty to Donald Trump that brought him in, and that's why he did what he did. But if you want to look at reality, this is probably the most corrupt individual I've ever seen in federal government. There are people that said he made Donald Trump look like a choir boy. He destroyed the EPA, the lotion, the baskets, the mattresses aside, the cone of silence, all of that is comic sideshow to the fact that he's destroying. And there are people I've known in the EPA for 20 years who are fearful of what he has done.
There was no basket, I think, by the way. I think it was just the lotion.
It just puts the lotion in the basket.
The phone booth. I mean,
But
and the first class travel. I could go on.
But to Brian's point, too, I mean, the really serious stuff, I mean, a lot of these scandals had a surreal, absurd comic quality to them, right?
God, you are so right.
But the real issue is ultimately it's the policies that are being put in place, and those are going to be continued because they are administration priorities. I mean, his deputy Wheeler is former coal lobbyist, Inhofe aide, Senator Jim Inhofe, who wrote a book that called Climate Change a Hoax. So there's going to be a lot of continuity with presumably less distractions.
And he'll be better at it because he's a little lower keyed. He does know how to work the wheels of government and the cogs of government. He's been in government. So he could actually be a more frightening man in that role, continuing the destruction of protections for the environment because he does know how to pull the levers.
Walter, I want to give you the last
very
word here. What do you see?
Yeah, I think, though, that for me it was about the ethics issues. All along, we knew he was going to be replaced with somebody who had the same outlook and was probably more effective because he'd follow rules and his deregulation might withstand legal challenge. So for me, it was always the ethics issues because this is so destructive to the government ethics program to have Scott Pruitt on the rampage that he was on and most members of Congress not intervening.
Walter Shaub, Brian Karem, thank you very much. Obviously, we will continue to follow this throughout the morning.
Right, an incredible tragedy in Thailand overnight where crews are trying to rescue those 12 kids and a coach trapped in a cave. One member of the rescue team died in the process of trying to get them help. We'll tell you the story. We'll tell you what it means for the overall effort. Died after running out of oxygen in one of those cave tunnels. This comes as rescuers now say there's only a limited amount of time to try to get the boys out alive. Our David McKenzie live at the scene in Thailand with the very latest. And as we said, David, what a tragedy.
Well, that's right, a tragedy. And now officials saying that the window that they've got to work with to get these 12 young boys from that cavern out safely and their coach could be rapidly diminishing. The officials saying that they have a short window because of the rain that could be coming in the next few days, and critically, John, because of the oxygen levels in that cavern where the boys have been held up now for more than 2 weeks. And that tragedy of a retired Navy SEAL diver here from Thailand. He was taking, in fact, oxygen to those boys on the way back through those tight caverns. He passed out and died. A real sense of resolve from the divers I've been speaking to today, and they just say they need to get this done. people will train for years to be cave divers like this using specialized equipment. They're getting these boys, as we've been speaking about, as the officials come in, they've been speaking about getting them out with no training or very little training at all. Now, they've managed to get a lot of water out of those caverns, John. If they can come through, wade through a lot of that cavern and just dive a small amount, that is a better scenario. But with heavy rains in the coming days, that window's going to close, and they're just going to have to do it, it seems, any moment now. Alison?
David, just when you think the stakes can't get any higher and it can't be any more treacherous, we get this news. Thank you for being there and staying on it. We will check back with you repeatedly throughout the show. Meanwhile, as you know, we've been covering this for weeks now. Health and Human Services does not have an exact number for the amount of children who have been separated from their parents. However, they did just increase their estimate by about 1,000. Why is this happening? Okay, so as we've been reporting for many, many days now, a federal judge has ruled that parents must be reunited with their children who were separated at the border. But that is not happening. In the past week, no parents have been reunited with their children. HHS officials have been stonewalling on answering any questions about this. But yesterday, for the first time in more than a week, Secretary Alex Azar told reporters he gave them a number, but it was a very rough number, and it was a striking number. He said under 3,000 children are still separated. Okay, so that's a higher number than we had heard. He said under, in other words, there's no specific number, and there appears to be no plan. So let's bring in CNN political commentator Errol Lewis and CNN political analyst Brian Karem. Hey, Errol, it's been pointed out that when you check your coat at a restaurant, you have more of a tracking device than what they did for these parents and kids. They didn't even give them a piece of paper with a number on it like you do when you get your coat at a coat shop.
It is shocking. You know, you're dry cleaning, all kinds of places, right, where you get some kind of indication that there's a connection, there's a transaction, there's a relationship that has to be maintained. In this case, they did it sort of willy-nilly, split up these people pretty efficiently, by the way. Really just scattered them to the four winds, thousands over the course of just a few weeks. Now they have to try and sort of undo that. And this is, I think, sort of a warning, generally speaking, for people who say that we need outsiders. These insiders don't know how to run government. Well, you know what? Insiders have a way of getting stuff right when it comes to something important like keeping families together. In this case, it looks like there was such sloppiness and such incompetence
and by the way,
that it becomes indistinguishable from malice.
And mean-spiritedness. I mean, in other words, they didn't think it out because they didn't want to reunite them. That wasn't their concern. Their concern, Brian Karem, was to the deterrent and the mean-spiritedness, and that worked.
And well, the deterrent isn't going to work
right,
because
but I mean
even
the mean-spiritedness.
The mean-spiritedness, absolutely. And let me tell you, the depravity of the Trump administration is on display with this issue for the entire world to see. This is antithetical to everything that we stand for. It's a violation of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. What they've done was done by design. They wanted to separate these children. They had no intention of putting them back together. We haven't gotten numbers because either A, they were too incompetent to count, or B, and probably more likely, they don't want us to know the numbers because they're higher than they've estimated. It's a very scary situation, Allison, and I got to tell you, there is no way that this was done willy-nilly. This was done with a purpose in mind. It was designated, designed by Stephen Miller. It was, and John Kelly, I understand, had his hand in it, and it is part of the authoritarian design of this government to rip bit. I'll take umbrage with this is how I feel. This is what people are telling me inside the system who are saying, look, we never had a plan. I'm just telling you what they've said. Look, I mean, the scary part about it is they have, as John Allen said, they're avoiding the rule of law. When you have the President of the United States saying, hey, we don't need judges, just take them, get out, he's like the old man standing on the lawn going, you get those kids off my lawn. Well, there's a rule of law.
He literally said that. He usually literally used to get off my lawn.
You're absolutely right.
I actually think that that's a good segue to something else the president said yesterday. He was at a rally in Montana overnight. And the president who put out that tweet about immigrants yesterday, he chose to attack the line used by George H.W. Bush, first at his convention speech, then at his inauguration speech, when he was talking about volunteerism around the country and civic duty around the country. And he talked about 1,000 points of light. And just remember what George H.W. Bush said. He said he wants volunteerism in these people who want to help spread like stars, like 1,000 points of light in a broad and peaceful sky. George H.W. Bush. And then this is what I hope we have what Donald Trump had to say about it last night.
You know, all the rhetoric you used to hear, the 1,000 points of light. What the hell was that, by the way? 1,000 points of light. What did that mean? Does anyone know? I know one thing. Make America great again, we understand. Putting America first, we understand. 1,000 points of light. I never quite got that one. I'm trying to say, what the hell is that? Has anyone ever figured that one out? And it was put out by a Republican, wasn't it?
You know, I figured it out, Errol. It was a speech written by Peggy Noonan, a lovely speech for George H.W. Bush, a man who was shot down in a plane in World War II, calling for Americans to rally together and help each other in civic organizations and charities.
It was not a simple slogan. It was not a simple enough slogan. But beyond that, I mean, for him, for his taste, is what he's saying.
He's also running down the 90-plus-year-old George H.W. Bush, who's recovering.
Well, and more to the point is just...
Go ahead, Errol.
This is the Trump presidency sort of writ small, right? This has been an invitation from the very beginning, from the time he came down the escalator. He's invited Americans to turn their back on our own deeply held cultural traditions. You have, people have talked about, foreigners have talked about the volunteer spirit in the American culture since the 19th century. It's a big, deep part of who we are. And he's inviting people to sort of, disregard it, denigrate it, turn your back on it, and so forth. I don't think it works in the end. But it's one more piece of ugliness that we've heard from this administration.
Well, let's be even more pointed than that. Mr. President, just because you're too stupid to not understand what George Bush meant doesn't mean the rest of us don't understand what he meant.
But Brian, furthermore, I mean, I think that what is the strategy in mocking a former Republican of your own party president and war hero? Who does that work with?
Well, it works with his base. I mean, let's be honest. There is no longer a GOP. There is a Trump party. Yeah. And the members of the GOP, including Flake and members of the Tea Party segment of that party, have fled. The people that are left in the GOP are those who own fealty to Donald Trump and those who worship Donald Trump. And he's appealing to those people.
A large part of the base is simply people enjoying the spectacle of an insult comic as president. The argument that conservatives have traditionally made in favor of smaller government is that the American experiment of volunteerism is supposed to offset that. So he's denigrating a 94-year-old warrior, a former president. He's also denigrating the conservative tradition.
Right.
Okay.
His own party.
But we have to get to another topic, and he's also mocking the Me Too movement last night. So he made a joke, listen to this, about Elizabeth Warren.
Pocahontas. They always want me to apologize for saying it. Let's say I'm debating Pocahontas, right? I promise you I'll do this. I will take, those little kits they sell on television for $2? Learn your heritage. We will take that little kit and say, but we have to do it gently. Because we're in the Me Too generation, so we have to be very gentle. And we will very gently take that kit and we will slowly toss it, hoping it doesn't hit her and injure her arm.
Errol, this is a man who has somehow been able to be Teflon against all of the accusations of sexual misconduct and even assault against him, and so now he can mock the Me Too movement.
I don't know if I would call it Teflon. I mean, and let's not ignore the racist slur, which is what Pocahontas is, right? I mean, he does this all the time. And here again, just an invitation to the public. Do you want to go down this dark road with me? Turn our back on everything that we held sacred, that we sort of held dear, and go into this new place, and people have to make a choice. I mean, that's what you do in the voting booth. That's what you do every day of the week. That's what you do at a rally like that. Donald Trump is taking us into some new kind of ugly place. If the Me Too movement has enough strength that it means enough to people, I think they're going to reject this.
It's interesting. I was actually on TV last night while this was happening.
As you always are.
You were on TV?
And we had some Trump supporters, Steve Cortez and other people supportive of the president, who actually cringed when they heard this, because they know the political reality, which is that in the last 10, live caller polls, the president's got a 26%, there's a 26% gender gap between Republicans and Democrats now, 26% as you head into the midterms, John. With that kind of gap, with that kind of energy among women, making Me Too jokes, not good politics.
Yeah, not at all.
Whatever. But that's not a gender gap, that's a gender chasm, but the president doesn't care, and that's core to his appeal.
Exactly. Don Rickles had better insult material. To John Avalon's point, our president simply wants to be an insult comic, and he's not very good at it. He'd get yanked on open mic night.
All right, Brian Karem, Errol Louis, thank you very much, gentlemen. I do appreciate it. Mike Pompeo is now in North Korea, the Secretary of State there for crucial meetings with the North Korean leader. Crucial meetings to find out if Kim Jong-un is
recommended chewable prebiotic fiber.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is now in North Korea, set to meet with Kim Jong-un and his team. Will he get any proof to substantiate President Trump's claim that the nuclear threat is over? Join me now, CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger, author of the new book, The Perfect Weapon. David, these are crucial meetings. There was the summit in Singapore where they signed a document. There was nothing really concrete in that document. Now Mike Pompeo is in North Korea. What does he need to leave with?
Well, he needs to leave with an understanding, John, that what you and I saw happen, unfold in Singapore actually meant something. Because, of course, Kim Jong-un's father and his grandfather had signed or agreed to much more specific denuclearization pledges than Kim Jong-un himself had agreed to in Singapore. So now the question is, can Mike Pompeo, in the next day and a half, work out with the North Koreans sort of three big things? The first is a timetable to actually begin to implement this that would make clear that the pledge meant something. Secondly, a system that would begin to build in verifiability, the ability to check that the North Koreans are doing what they're saying they're doing, even if they don't turn over their nuclear weapons at the opening stages. And I think the third thing is provide the North Koreans with some concrete assurances that the U.S. actually is going to guarantee the North's security.
Because since Singapore, what we've seen from the satellite photos and what we've heard from the defense